It is Tuesday, April 27th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And joining us today is the co-founder of Roster Watch, a co-host of the Roster Watch show on SiriusXM Fantasy. He is Byron Lambert. Byron, thanks very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, boys. I really appreciate you having me on. I look forward to talking this out.
Absolutely. As we speak, it is, of course, 2 days from the start of the 2021 NFL Draft. We can finally find out exactly what order the QBs will go in. We can finally see how the Raiders plan to screw up their top pick this time. It's an annual rite of passage, I think. But we're focused on fantasy here as always. So our focus for today is going to be on NFL draft prospects who look overrated or underrated by fantasy drafters at this point. We're going to primarily be using the rookie draft ADP from dynastyleaguefootball.com, those mock drafts run by Ryan McDowell over there. Before we get to the picks, though, Byron, I know that you're a veteran of Senior Bowl trips. We were talking a little bit about it before the show. So that experience this year, was it any different from previous years, just in terms of what you were able to see in the players or even what you got of the experience of watching the players?
Actually, it was improved because they moved to a new stadium, University of South Alabama. It's a beautiful, beautiful new facility, and it just set up wonderfully for watching football and scouting the practices. It's just got a better line of sight and is mint condition. So from that perspective, it was phenomenal. Where we were limited is in our, every year we get a lot of media access to the players there. And, you didn't have the capability to interview the players or maybe kind of rub elbows with some of the scouts and agents in the ways that we have in years past. But, mostly I'm there for practice every year anyways, the 3 days of practice. That's where we take away the most intelligence that results in, being impactful in our fantasy leagues the following year. So we're there. We've been scouting Senior Bowls, NFL combines, training camps, pro days for 10 years now at Roster Watch. So I've seen a lot of players, and when you see a good one out there, it really stands out now.
How often do you come away from watching a player in live practice and come away thinking differently of him than how he looks when you're watching him on your TV screen or on a computer screen?
Yeah, that matters. I think sometimes it's different than your perception. I'll give you an example. I went to Ravens training camp a couple years ago, and I just fell in love with Gus Edwards. He's awesome. Guy's an awesome running back, and the team loves him. They love him in that building, right? And he was a guy that may be going there. Even at me as an avid fantasy analyst, Gus Edwards at that point was still kind of, he's just kind of perceived as maybe just a guy, right? And you get there and you say, damn, that Gus Edwards he's a real player. So sometimes you'll see that. Sometimes guys will move a little bit better in person than maybe you expected. You know what I mean? Like Keenan Allen, what was he, a 4.7 guy at his pro day out of Cal? And then, I went to the training camp. I said, I've never seen, there's only a few guys I've ever seen run routes. This guy moves unbelievably, right? So there's definitely something to be taken away. The running backs is very interesting to see how they move on the field. There's a big difference. There's some guys just prowl in a whole different, they just move like a different animal out there, so it does make a difference.
So who stood out to you, good or bad, at this year's Senior Bowl?
Well, first and foremost, Mac Jones. I've really been keyed in on scouting quarterbacks for the last decade. It's at least in our community at Roster Watch, as I've contributed there over the last decade, I think I've kind of been known for my quarterback analysis. And I was very clear after that Senior Bowl that Mac Jones was the best Senior Bowl quarterback performance I'd ever seen through a week of practice, if not the best. Right at the very top. And we're talking about Russell Wilson, Josh Allen, Daniel Jones, Carson Wentz, Baker Mayfield. All of those guys had good Senior Bowls. And I left and I said, Mac Jones is right at the top of that mountain for sure. So he looked amazing. I predicted after the Senior Bowl that he should be viewed as a top 10 talent. I didn't know it was going to result in him actually looking like he's probably going to go top 10, maybe top 5, maybe top 3 in this draft. He's that kind of player. I left thinking for sure he was definitely one of the reasons that the receivers at Alabama looked as good as they did. It wasn't just the opposite way where he was the one benefiting from having these great receivers. You could tell he's such a good quarterback that was a reciprocal relationship out there at Alabama. He was a contributing factor. So Mac Jones blew me away. He's a stud prospect. I know people in San Francisco are a little bent out of shape. I get why. I mean, you got to love the other. It's an amazing quarterback class. The best quarterback class I've scouted in 10 years. There's truly 5 guys that are worthy of a top 10 pick. You're splitting hairs. It's a little bit of it's going to be like what your philosophy is as an organization as to what flavor you prefer. But I think people do need to rest assured that Mac Jones is a stud quarterback prospect. He looks like he's going to transition very well, and I understand why Kyle Shanahan's interested. And then the other guys I'd say were Amari Rogers, the slot receiver from Clemson. And then just a few half-speed drills we saw from Najee Harris live out there. That guy's the real deal. He's a real. It's
funny that everyone thinks Kyle Shanahan. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say he's RB1 as a rookie immediately. Like not number 1, but he's an RB1. He'll be a top 12 running back in redraft this year. Najee Harris will be.
I think if he lands in Pittsburgh too, I mean, he's obviously going to have the opportunity to, finish among the top 12 running backs in total touches at least. Going back to Mac Jones, I was just going to say it's funny that everyone thinks Kyle Shanahan is this genius until he, evidently decides Mac Jones is his guy. Then he's like an idiot. So I think we should trust Kyle Shanahan. Maybe he knows what he's doing if he does take Mac Jones at 3.
He's got a lot of Joe Burrow to him. So, if that's the way you view him, you would give up a haul for Joe Burrow last year, right? So I get that economics are a little different in this draft class, but if that's the way the 49ers view him, I think it's I can get behind it.
It'll be fun to see what happens when we can actually get to the draft and stop with the rumors and see what really goes down. Let's move on now, though, to overrated, underrated prospects for fantasy folks going forward. Of course, this is some based on perception, too. We only have so much information to go on, but this is what we have to go on right now. So we'll start with the overrated guys because we like to be negative. Byron, as our guest, why don't you give us the first guy that you think from a fantasy standpoint looks overrated heading into NFL draft?
People love negativity, don't they?
Absolutely.
Well, I think, you said wide receiver.
Anybody.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the wide receivers. I mean, Jaylen Waddle at wide receiver 4. I know once you're, there's only so many spots you can go up when you're at, that high in the rankings, but there's a big margin of difference at that, at that point. Like the difference between 4 and 2 is potentially a lot, right? Whereas the difference between 10 and 12 is sometimes trivial, right? So I think Jaylen Waddle is egregious at 4. I mean, there's no way in any world where he should be lower than 3, and in my opinion he should be wide receiver 2, sight unseen at this point in any rookie draft. So that would be my first underrated wide
That's
receiver.
fine. You can start on the positive side. There's nothing wrong with that.
That'd be my first underrated wide receiver. Sorry guys.
No problem.
And then Elijah Moore at wide receiver 7. He's underrated. Like he needs to be a top 4 or 5 guy. He looks like Brandon Cooks or John Brown or Tyler Lockett or Marquise Brown out there. He's got the chops to separate. Sorry I threw you guys for a loop on this one, but those are my 2 highly undervalued guys at the top. And I think if you look a little lower, I'm not a big Kadarius Toney guy from what I saw at the Senior Bowl. Not that he's a bad player. I was just really shocked after seeing him at the Senior Bowl to find out that he was viewed as a first-round pick in NFL draft circles. He reminded me a lot of like a KJ Hamler type or something out there, like a good player. I'm curious what type of real impact he can have like over the long run in the NFL. But look, he's a consensus round 1 pick amongst all the notable experts and media personalities in the industry. So when you look at these rankings and see that he's wide receiver 10, like you guys know that fantasy production is very well correlated to draft capital. So, I mean, there's clearly some arbitrage here. If he's being drafted as wide receiver 10, which is probably a day 2 or 3 pick that may never even play, versus the round one pick he's being acclaimed to be by most of the people in the know, I mean, that almost guarantees he's going to get a lot more opportunity than wide receiver 10.
Right. Yeah. I actually kind of forced myself to rank Toney higher than I wanted to, just factoring in that, he's going to be a top 50 pick. He might be a round one pick. I do think he's interesting in fantasy because he can add value with rushing production if his NFL team lets him do that. And if he has a first round pick, I got to imagine his NFL team is going to, get him the ball on the ground. We see guys like Robert Woods, guys like Curtis Samuel. I think Curtis Samuel is probably my favorite comp for Toney. Samuel is someone who split time at different positions in college, took a bit of a while to get going in the NFL. I think Toney could be similar, but if he's going to get, 20 to 30 carries a season, that's a pretty big deal for fantasy.
Yeah, on the other side, though, is Nicole Hardman, who actually spent an extra year than Kadarius Toney did focused on wide receiver in college. So, I mean, I'm not saying because Nicole Hardman is slow getting going for fantasy owners right now that Kadarius Toney is a bad pick. But that's kind of my hesitation is I'm not sure if I want to bother with Kadarius Toney if I'm expecting to have to wait for what I'm going to get. I'm not even really sure what the ceiling is going to be when I get there, especially if I have to take him over somebody who is a more proven wideout, De'Ami Brown in that range, Tylen Wallace, for example.
I think Paris Campbell was another reasonable comp here for Toney. Yep. That type of player, right? I mean, he hasn't contributed for injury reasons, but a guy that you're interested in that seems like he could have a big impact, but it's not totally clear, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm totally with you on Elijah Moore being undervalued. I mean, if an NFL team takes Kadarius Toney over Elijah Moore, I don't understand. I think Moore basically already is what you're hoping Toney can become. So, Elijah Moore has been getting more round one buzz now over the past few days. I've read that he might be the fourth wide receiver off the board, which I think would be totally reasonable. And yeah, I think he is undervalued in that dynasty ADP right now.
Jared, who else do you have in the underrated category?
Yeah, so Elijah Moore was one of my guys. Let's move to running back. I think Trey Sermon over on DLF, he is running back 8. He's 25th overall. And for me, beyond the top 3 guys, Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, I think Trey Sermon in this class has the best chance to emerge as his team's lead back. Probably not workhorse. That's probably going too far, but someone who can carry 220 times and also catch 30 or so balls in a season. He's 6 foot, 215 pounds. He ran a 4.6 in the 40, but the rest of his testing was good. 80th percentile vertical, 88th percentile broad jump, 85th percentile 3-cone. So he's a plus athlete at that size. He had an up and down college career, but he definitely flashed at times, especially down the stretch this past season. And, there's a lot of film guys who like him quite a bit, that I trust. So again, for me, outside the top 3, I'm just looking for upside for fantasy. And I think Sermon has as much, if not more upside than anyone outside those top 3 guys.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, you see RB8 in the current ADPs, and I think it's pretty clear that Sermon is emerging basically as the consensus RB4 in this class, amongst the industry. By the way, it's a pretty bad running back class. I mean, I think everybody basically agrees on that at this point. My comp was Jamal Williams for basically the reasons that you laid out. I don't think over any long period of time he'll ever be viewed as like a full-blown starter or workhorse, but I think he can definitely be a rotational guy that gets quite a few touches, in a season, or potentially let's say he's on a team where there's running back injuries and you find out Trey Sermon's getting the start and he doesn't have a lot of competition for touches in a particular week. He's a dude you'll be interested in flexing off your waiver wire or playing for min salary over, on a DFS slate or something like that. If there's ever a situation emerges where it's pretty clear that he's going to get some notable volume of touches, I think that's what you got with Sermon. So yeah, I agree. 8 is too low, man. RB8.
I'll be very curious to see if he sneaks into the end of round 2 or even early round 3, because it seems like there's at least a pocket within the fantasy community that's just waiting for Trey Sermon to blow up. There has been some more buzz on him generating lately. He has climbed up in best ball ADP for redraft. recently. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him climb. I'd be curious to see where he goes. I wonder where Trey Sermon falls on the joyfulness scale with Jamal Williams, because I'm not sure any player on Pro Football Reference has a more smiley headshot than Jamal Williams.
That's right.
I'll tell you guys something funny about how the draft cycle always comes full circle and in a variety of ways. And I'm sure you guys have learned that or observed that through your different times covering the draft. But we were at the Senior Bowl. I think it was day 3 of the Senior Bowl. And I looked over at my business partner, Alex, my co-host, Alex, and over at Roster Watch. And he just said, man, this is a bad running back class out here. And we said, but what? So maybe we need to start thinking about Trey Sermon just standing down there on the sidelines with Najee Harris and DeVonta Smith as one of these guys that came to kind of like be there, and to participate in everything except for the on-field drills, to meet the agents, to interview with the NFL teams and the scouts and, all that. Usually those are the better players, or at least the ones that have gotten information that they've got a decent draft grade, that they don't feel like they have to participate 100%, in Senior Bowl week. And so we didn't see anything on the field from Sermon that week, and I hadn't watched film on him yet, but I remember we said, man, this is already looking like a bad running back class. I wonder if we're going to need to circle back and see what the deal is on Sermon. And it feels like that's kind of come to a head here.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Amari Rogers at the top there. I know he went through some running back drills at his pro day. Do you think there's any chance that he makes that move? I mean, I think he could be like a top 6 or 7 running back in this class if he makes that move.
Yeah, I think it's a 0% chance that the NFL makes that move. I think it's the reverse Antonio Gibson, or kind of like the reverse Chase Claypool, where they worked Claypool out at tight end last year. They worked Antonio Gibson out. Antonio Gibson looked like a stud running back at the Senior Bowl, and then they go work him out kind of at receiver also at his pro day. So the teams are looking for versatility. I actually interviewed Amari Rogers about 2 weeks ago on Roster Watch, and I asked him that very specific question. We talked about that topic, and it was really teams. They view him as a wide receiver, but they just want to know if, like, on occasion they could move him into the backfield for like a Brandon Ayuk or a Deebo Samuel, or one of these guys who will get like one touch out of the backfield. You see Kyle Shanahan do it with Deebo, right? Or somebody that you can kind of fake people out coming through motion back there. Like, there's no real thought to moving him to running back. The guy's a great wide receiver. I mean, his dad, T. Martin, is the wide receiver coach for the Baltimore Ravens, and he's also the former quarterback for the Steelers and University of Tennessee. He came out in 2000. So he's been raised to be a wide receiver, and the guy is an excellent wide receiver. So it was a head scratcher when they did that, because he dominated the Senior Bowl at wide receiver. I mean, he dominated like Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel and Jamison Crowder and McLaurin, some of these guys that have really popped after having a great Senior Bowl. He did that same exact, he put that same show on. So much like Gibson the year before, a little head scratcher, they see that performance and then want to go tinker with moving positions. But I think what we've found out is that the NFL is just looking for situational versatility from some of these guys. They value that. And that's really all it is with Rodgers. He's a wide receiver. He's a slot wide receiver.
I like Amari Rogers better than Jared does. I'll be curious to see where he lands on draft weekend. I have another wideout on my underrated list that seemed to pop at the Senior Bowl. Josh Palmer from Tennessee. Downfield threat, good size in this class with a ton of small guys, 6'1", 210. Like I said, stood out at the Senior Bowl. Daniel Jeremiah called him an early winner there. Only Cade Johnson got a higher PFF receiving grade at the Senior Bowl than Josh Palmer did in workouts. 16.6 yard average depth of target last year, ranked 31st among 510 draft-eligible wideouts, according to Pro Football Focus. Market shares okay last year, haven't been great, so maybe he was underused, or maybe there was a reason he was little used at Tennessee. What'd you see, Byron, from Josh Palmer down at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I thought he was sneaky good all week, actually. I mean, it wasn't a guy that leapt off the field at you, but a guy I kept turning over to Alex and saying, hey, like, just keep a little bit of an eye on Palmer. Like, he's kind of slick down there, and he's got a good frame, and he's kind of having a sneaky under the radar. Here's the thing about this class, right? Like, I know the running back class is bad, and I think after some of the pro days, people started to come off even the wide receiver class. I think this is a good wide receiver class. I mean, maybe look, it's got great top shelf talent. Maybe the top 5 is not as good as last year's top 5, which was historic, but the depth of this class is awesome. So undoubtedly, there's going to push some good players pretty far down in like the rankings across the industry, right? So this is going to be pretty hard to get super high on a guy like Palmer. But to me, when you're starting to throw darts or take flyers on these dudes that are lower in the rankings or, later in the draft, you want the size, speed, catch radius players. So to me, it's very evident. It's Nico Collins. It's Josh Palmer, Des Fitzpatrick out of Louisville. All 3 of those guys we saw at the Senior Bowl, all sneaky good weeks that have some of the physical attributes that you're really, really looking for there. I think Palmer and Fitzpatrick actually were similar in a lot of ways. I like both of them. And then Nico was just a little more of a guy who beasted at the catch point, like very, very regularly against good corners, but wasn't separating. So we just needed to see what he was going to run, but he ran well. So to me, if you're going later in the rankings, those are definitely the dudes you're going to key in on just based on upside. I think you have Tamori and Terry there at Florida State might be the other dude that kind of fits that box.
Yeah, I'm with that. I mean, especially in this class, there's so many guys we're worried about size, whether it be height or weight. So Palmer's someone who definitely has the size. I've heard a couple people mention him as a sleeper in this wide receiver class. I watched 2 games of him last week, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. He didn't really jump off the film to me. I also think I look at his career at Tennessee, kind of underwhelming. He couldn't surpass like Jawan Jennings or Marquez Callaway over his first few seasons there, and then even last year, with those guys gone, he didn't have too big of a season, so it doesn't really check the production box for me. But as a later round pick, I do think he has that size that makes him intriguing.
Yeah, definitely like a round 4, round 5 rookie draft kind of prospect, not too early. Couple other, we're talking about the size, how especially when you get later in a rookie draft, you want to go for somebody who is a winner on size, catch radius, just to differentiate from this world of slot receivers that are about to flood the league in this class. But Austin Watkins, I think, is interesting. Cousin of Sammy Watkins and Devondre Campbell and Jaron Kearse and Jaylen Watkins. Started at community college, but then went to UAB. Good market shares in 2019, second team all-conference that year, first team all-conference this past year, despite playing just 7 and 9 games. And then the final name I want to bring up is Michael Strawn. And if you see his name, it looks like Strachan, but it's actually Mike Strawn. Grew up in the Bahamas, came to the States in high school, football, basketball, track athlete in high school, ran track in addition to playing football at Charleston at the D2 level. He delivered the dominant kinds of market shares that you hope to see from a pro prospect when he plays at that low level. 2018, he was almost 32% receptions, almost 43% receiving yards, 53% touchdown catches. 2019, he was at 35.6% receptions, 41.5% yards, 67.9% of Charleston's touchdown catches that year. He was the first guy in school history to hit 1,000 receiving yards in a season. Then he did it again the following year. So, we'll see what he has for the NFL level. He's kind of old for a prospect. I believe he's going to be 24 before opening day. But again, if we're looking at the end of a rookie draft, round 5, here's a guy that's 6'5", 225 and ran a sub 4.6 40.
You always got to remember these wide receiver classes really go about 25 or 30 deep in guys that you could actually be like somewhat interested in, right? I mean, last year it was Quintez Cephas, guys like that you like hard to even get him in your top 20 or something maybe, but ultimately like decent prospects kind of reared their head a little bit. You saw Tyler Johnson last year. I mean, he was a little higher for some folks, but yeah, I mean, it's Quez Watkins, man. He had a little trouble getting lined up at the Senior Bowl. That worried us a little bit, like getting his assignments right. But he did have some definitely like flashed a little bit of athletic ability out there. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Byron, what was Jonathan Adams Jr. at the Senior Bowl out of Arkansas State?
I don't recall that one, Jared. He
So-
might have been, man. He's 110.
He was. He
players out
didn't-
there.
he didn't-
I get to know most of them, but
Okay. Yeah, he's a guy I like as a sleeper. He's big. He crushed the jumping drills at his pro day. And I watched his game against Kansas State last year. The only like upper level program that he faced, but he had a big game. Definitely looked like he belonged with those guys. So I like him.
Who was the darling in Tampa a few years ago? Justin, was it Justin?
Justin Watson.
Yeah, Justin Watson. There's guys like that every year, right?
Yeah.
You need to know them.
All right, so we tried to get you to spit venom from the start, but you opted for rainbows. Now it's time to get negative, though. Give me somebody who's overrated as a fantasy prospect at the moment.
Right, I would too nice, guys. Well, I thought Rashad Bateman, even though I liked him, was a little bit high in these ADPs. I think like I'm in a different. For me, that was more. I think he was wide receiver 2 in the ADPs that you guys sent. So to me, that's Jaylen Waddle territory. I have Bateman, who I like. I have him as my wide receiver 6 in my rankings. I think he could go as high as wide receiver 4 or 5 in any reasonable set of rankings. Maybe 3 if you hate DeVonta Smith or whatever. So to me, he's really like probably about wide receiver 5 in this class on consensus. So to see him wide receiver 2 in ADP is just like by definition, he's overvalued.
So is it just the film on them, Jaylen Waddle versus Rashad Bateman, that steers you so strongly toward Waddle over Bateman?
I mean, it's just the explosive athleticism of Waddle. You look at him and you can imagine Tyreek Hill. Will he turn into it? I'm not sure. Maybe he'll be Ruggs or Marquise Brown, but that's a tantalizing upside. It's the thing with Waddle is not just the speed, but it's the power he plays with. Like that's the thing that separates Tyreek Hill. That's why he's an amazing 100-meter sprinter or 60-meter versus somebody who runs like a 40. The difference in like a 100-meter sprinter and like a 40 or 60-meter sprinter is converting the speed to power. And Tyreek Hill generates so much power. You can see how powerful he is, right, when he runs. It's just obvious. It's different than watching a smooth, fast guy. You can just see. And so to me, when you watch Waddle, you see that kind of power. And it's tantalizing. And he's clearly the kind of player that's going to be able to get the ball in a variety of ways. And I think he's going to be drafted very, very high. Mm-hmm. So, to me, that's what kind of put Waddle over. Bateman has awesome film. The measurables at the pro day were a little bit less than you were hoping for. I came away thinking that he looks a lot like a Juju or a Nelson Aguilar to me. I think he kind of plays like Juju and Nelson Aguilar's body, to tell you the truth. Juju's more of like a 215-pound guy. So those are good comps. I like Bateman a lot, but just not enough to push him to number 2.
Bateman's pro day was so confusing to me, to weigh in at 190 and then run like a 4.39 40. Cause to me on film, he looks like he's like 210 and he looks like a 4.5 guy. So he just confuses me a bit. But I mean, his production throughout his career at Minnesota was really strong. I think he's another guy who has a chance to be a first-round pick on Thursday night.
Yeah, he's definitely a very, very good-looking player, and I would deserve being a first-round pick if he is.
All right, Jared, we don't want to make Byron be too negative all at once, so why don't you give us an overrated prospect?
Yeah, Rondell Moore, and I hate it because he's such a fun player to watch, and he's someone I kind of I wish I could get some pieces of in Dynasty, but if he's going at wide receiver 5, 9th overall, which is where he is in ADP, I'm probably not going to have much of him. Obviously the freshman season was awesome, but we just didn't see much of him after that because he had multiple hamstring injuries that cost him 11 of Purdue's 18 games over the past 2 seasons. So I think durability is a concern. He ran a very limited route tree at Purdue. The vast majority of his stuff was around the line of scrimmage. So I think, and listen, he's awesome. He gets separation on those shorter routes. He's probably the best after catch wide receiver in this class. But I just wonder if he's going to become more than that at the next level. And then there's the height. I mean, people talk about DeVonta Smith's weight, which is obviously a concern. But Rondell Moore being 5'7", I mean, there's only been one 1,000-yard season by a wide receiver 5'7" or shorter in NFL history. So he would be kind of breaking the mold if he becomes this fantasy stud, which a lot of people think he's going to be.
Yeah, Rondale Moore I think is the kind of guy that you hope that your NFL team drafts because whatever he does is going to be fun to watch. But I'm just a little scared of the fantasy outlook because I don't know what his pro role looks like. I don't know how important the durability issues of the past 2 years will prove to be. Maybe he'll outgrow those and it's not an issue, but it's worrisome when a guy comes in with hamstring issues. the counter argument on him from more people is like, how can you question size for Moore and not question size for DeVonta Smith, who is also a unicorn size-wise if he does produce in the NFL? And I get that. I mean, you can certainly, that's a valid argument. I have an easier time projecting DeVonta Smith's role into the NFL, though, than I do Rondale Moore. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe he just ends up being a 5'7" wideout that we haven't seen before. But at where you have to draft him, I can't get comfy with, betting that that's going to happen.
Yeah, we're all over the place on Rondale Moore at Roster Watch. I actually sat down with Rondell Moore for a one-on-one interview this offseason. He's an awesome, awesome kid. His tape is clearly electric. We can dismiss the durability issues. The 2 hamstring issues he had were, it was totally unrelated. And that's a non-issue with him. The size is an issue though. And look, when you talk about DeVonta Smith, it's the BMI that's the epic outlier with him, not necessarily the weight. We can find some guys that are 170 that have played, right? Desean Jackson, Hollywood Brown. Pretty fair to think at 6'1", Smith put on 5 pounds when he gets that second NFL puberty and like a real strength and conditioning program at the next level, right? So to be fair though, 5'7" is against all odds. That's a hard bet to make. Hard bet to make, especially the ADP is pretty rich right now. So I love Rondell Moore. He has a chip on his shoulder. I'll tell you something very, very cool about him. He told me that if he wasn't a professional football player, that he would be a professional gymnast. You guys can see that on the tape. I mean, he's a stick of dynamite. He's like the most explosive Mighty Mouse you've ever seen. He's like the MJD of wide receivers or something, right? So rooting for him big, but it's tough. It's tough to set aside the 5'7". So we root for him, and I'm very interested in Rondale Moore, but just not at the very, very top of this class. I hope to see him drafted very early though, this week.
I'm certainly not going to be mad if he succeeds. I have absolutely nothing against him. I'm just not taking him in the middle of round 1. It's also nice that all of us can see that chip on his shoulder because he's a lot easier for us to, view. Byron, do you have another overrated player from this rookie class?
Dude, I asked, these kids are nice. I have good interviews with all of them. I asked Rondell Moore, and we were having a great interview. I just asked him very casually, like, has the size durability stuff come up at all? And this was before his pro day. This was before we knew he was 5'7", and he bristled at that question. And he shut me down really, really. That one, you could tell I touched like a nerve a little bit on that one. And I think we came to find out why, right? He measured in at 5'7". The other guys that I thought were a little bit too high, well, this is easy. I mean, Chuba Hubbard and Jamar Jefferson at the running back position. Chuba Hubbard, the disappointing pro day, the size profile. I think, you think about Justice Hill and these guys that come out of the Oklahoma State program. They can look pretty good at that program. I just don't think they project to really being super impactful volume guys at the next level. And then Jamar Jefferson, I know people want to quote the GPS like 21 miles an hour top speed or whatever during the season. And so maybe that's something I still need to reconcile a little bit. But he had an abomination of a pro day with terrible, terrible, unacceptable athletic testing that is below the threshold at the next level. And me personally, somebody who's watched a lot of film over the years, I didn't think the film of Jamar Jefferson was good either. I mean, I look for some very specific skill position specific skills when I watch these guys, and I didn't see Jefferson as a very precocious natural running back either. So it's a big step up in competition too, to this next level. There's a lot of guys who look good at running back at college and they don't look good or even really get the chance they get the NFL. So those were 2 running backs. I thought ADPs were likely too high given what the expected return that I'm anticipating.
Yeah, Jefferson, I'm with you on for sure. He didn't do it for me on tape, and like you said, the pro day was horrible. Hubbard, I've gone back and forth on. His pro day was okay. Like, I think people expected him to run faster than 4.5, but 4.5 at 210 pounds, not horrible. Obviously, the massive 2019 season. The thing I keep going back on in 2020, he supposedly was playing through a high ankle sprain for at least part of that season. If that's the case, like, we know high ankle sprains are totally killers for running backs. I think you can almost throw out at least part of that season if you're getting the guy that went for 2,000 yards in 2019. I mean, that's intriguing. I think the Tevin Coleman comp is perfect for Hubbard. Like, I think he's that slashing speed type of running back. Never going to be someone who's going to get 18, 20 carries per game, but maybe 12 to 15, and you hope he breaks off some big plays. I think he could be that type of guy in the NFL.
I have Hubbard and Jefferson down as well, but I want to even expand it to something we mentioned earlier, that I think this is just a bad running back class. And I think that in general, I would try not to overrate any individual player just because you're comparing him to the rest of that class. Just because Chuba Hubbard looks better than a lot of the other running backs this year doesn't make him a good NFL prospect. So I think beyond Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, Trey Sermon, Kenneth Gainwell, I'm probably not going to be the drafter on any other running backs in this class. Maybe not even Gainwell. We'll see where he lands, both NFL-wise and where he starts going rookie draft-wise. But I mean, I would just rather take one of these wideouts that's going to go in round 2 or round 3 of the NFL draft than reaching for a round 4, round 5 running back, just because he landed in what looks like a positive situation in the NFL. A year later, any of these guys could be Raquel Armstead and doing absolutely nothing for your dynasty team.
Well, and to your point, Jared, I thought the thing with Hubbard, the 3-down capability is so important to fantasy success, but also to really getting even the touches in the NFL, right? And I thought he was a better blocker than maybe some of our colleagues in the industry gave him credit for. But to your point, I don't see a guy that the NFL is ever going to view as somebody who plays on all 3 downs and can really accumulate significant volume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely with you there.
Jared, any other overrated guys?
Yeah, I do. Let's see, who else do I have here? Well, you mentioned Kenneth Gainwell. He's RB4 in the ADP, which is a couple spots higher than I have him. But to have him at 11th overall, have him in the first round of dynasty rookie drafts, I don't understand that. I mean, I don't get why Gainwell is significantly higher than Michael Carter in this ADP we're looking at. I mean, I think they're very similar guys. They're both actually exactly 201 pounds. Carter actually tested a bit better at his pro day, particularly in the agility drills than Kenneth Gainwell, which I think is important for an undersized guys like this who are, going to be more change of pace types. Gainwell had just the one big season at Memphis, opted out of the 2020 season. So I just have a lot of questions about him. And even if he hits, again, I think it's as a change of pace type guy. So I don't think he belongs in round 1 of these dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah, I have Gainwell and Carter as my number 6 and 7 running backs in this class. So back to back, I think it's a great point that you make, Jared, that if you're going to like Gainwell, you probably need to like Carter. So if Carter's ADP is significantly lower, it's clearly a better value at this point, and somebody we would want to be keyed in on when we're looking at kind of like leverage versus ADP at this moment in time. With Gainwell, I think it's pretty simple. A lot of NFL teams are just going to look at tapping that Memphis running back pipeline. Yep. It's been a successful pipeline, right? But the overarching question is at 201 pounds, how much volume can you really get in the NFL? I don't think it's a whole lot. Some people will counter that with the fact that he's going to get receiving volume, which is going to make him more valuable for fans. It's kind of a mitigating factor to any lack of volume. And, I think you can make that case for sure when it comes to Gainwell.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think on top of those things, he ran a sub 4.5 40 and he has a 50 catch season behind him in college. But I agree that there's not a whole lot separating him and Michael Carter. And if Kenneth Gainwell stays in that later part of round 1, I'm taking one of the receivers that's going there instead. I'm not taking Kenneth Gainwell and leaving Terrace Marshall on the board, for example. It just doesn't work for me no matter what I'm trying to do. What was that reaction?
That would be an epic travesty if that
And that's the range that you would have to do it. You would have to leave somebody like that on the board to take Kenneth Gainwell. So yeah, even though I like Gainwell the player, I agree.
I'm going to hit you for one of your guys though, man.
I'm going to throw out Amon-Ra St. Brown.
All right. That's what we wanted to hear, dude.
Wide receiver 8 in that DLF ADP, 15th overall. What stands out about him besides the name and the backstory? I mean, he's fine, but I would have to take him over De'Ami Brown, for example, who looks like a bigger downfield threat. I think it's easier to see what De'Ami Brown's going to do for me in fantasy. And I like Tylen Wallace in there. I know that there's kind of both ways on him, but the production profile with Tylen Wallace, the way he rebounded from the ACL tear, I'm a little concerned about the family history thing, maybe him having a better chance of hurting that knee further going forward. But for now, until I see the NFL let him stay on the board until round 4 or later, I'm taking Tylen Wallace in that range over Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I view those. I kind of have a group of guys in my rankings that I kind of lump into a basket there. And right now I have Amon St. Brown a little bit above Tylan Wallace, but I think it's a group right there that you're kind of looking at. The one thing about St. Brown is he ran the bad 40 at his pro day, but he did have pretty good burst scores. So, sometimes you see it's a little weird when those don't match up because usually they both are some measure of explosiveness. But you see some explosive ability on tape with St. Brown. So when you see the horrible 40, we're always looking for corroboration and agreement throughout this process. So when you get something like that bad 40 just kind of throws you for a loop. I think you say, okay, well, he did show some pretty good burst in those drills. So maybe that's kind of where his explosiveness comes. I think he's a little bit of a physical, wide receiver. Tylen Wallace, dude, Alex, my business partner, loves him because he also covers the Longhorns and scouts the Big 12. So he's been watching Wallace for a while. And then he had a great Senior Bowl. I think people were a little surprised he didn't run a little bit faster, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
I think that matches the tape. I didn't see great speed from Wallace on tape. He's a contested catch guy, and I think he's going to have to be at the NFL level. We'll see if he can be. Same thing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think. I mean, you mentioned the jumping drills, Byron. I think that shows up on tape. He is good in contested situations, but another guy, don't see him creating a ton of separation, and I'm just not sure he's going to be as good at those contested catches in the NFL as he was at USC. Durability also concern for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had 2 separate shoulder injuries at USC, sports hernia surgery after the 2019 season. So, yeah, he's a guy I'm lower on than consensus too. I don't even love Tylan Wallace, but I do have Wallace ranked ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown right now.
Well, I'm looking over at our buddy Matt Kelly's player profiler right now on Tylan Wallace. I'm sure you guys have visited that site before. 9% burst, 33% agility, 11% catch radius. Those are bad statistical athletic numbers for a guy that's 5'11", 194 that you say is not separating. He's got to kind of win at the catch point, is probably more of a slot than an outside receiver in the NFL. It's just those were a little bit concerning numbers for Wallace. So I kind of put both those guys in that bucket, to tell you the truth.
Those Big 12 receivers can be dangerous too. Like, they're going to put up big numbers against those defenses.
Those defenses are the worst, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we have market shares, though, to explain away some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think all of that is why Tylan Wallace is like in wide receiver 10 range as opposed to wide receiver 3 or 4. I think if somebody comes along with his production profile from college and winning downfield as he did, and then tests well, I think that guy is, in Rashad Bateman's spot right now. So as it is, I think the downside's kind of baked in there. Byron, do you have any other overrated guys before we wrap this up?
Man, I think we hit on all of them. I think we hit on all the overrated guys. Let's see if I got anything else here. I'll tell you, I'll give you one last underrated guy. I thought at RB9 that Kylan Hill was a little bit low.
Yes.
Kylan
Hill's my later round sleeper running back. I like.
Didn't notice him too much at the Senior Bowl. He kind of improved as the week went on. Running backs are a little hard to scout, when you're not getting full contact drills. What stood out to me about Kylan Hill on tape was, first of all, he had 29 targets in 3 games this last year. So a lot of people using statistical models for their rankings have not adjusted. Really, they're saying there's not a big enough sample last year because it didn't make sense to me. Kylan Hill is an excellent receiver on tape. Excellent receiver. So I couldn't figure out why his reception numbers were so low. I went back. I figured, well, they didn't start feeding him until last year, dude. He was getting 10 targets a game. He's having 7 receptions a game. He looked like a wide receiver out there almost. And then, so I said, okay, you put that together with has some pretty good feet. His burst ratings are pretty good. He didn't have the long speed. He ran 4.57 at his pro day. I think it's good enough. But the burst metrics came out pretty good. I think it was a 70%er for Kylan Hill. And I thought that showed up, man. He sheds. He's got good vision. He's got a little lateral agility. He's got good feet. And I think he's got underrated pass catching capability. And at 214 pounds in a class that lacks size, I think you start saying Kylan Hill is a player we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think probably behind Trey Sermon, he might be the next guy with the best chance to be someone who can be his team's lead ball carrier and lead pass catcher. Showed both. He never showed it at the same time in college, but he had a nice rushing production season, and then that big receiving production, even though it was only in a few games last season. Has the size, has the athleticism. So I'm hoping that he can maybe even like round 4, I think would be a good result for Kylan Hill this weekend.
Jared, any other guys you want to throw out there?
No, my last underrated guy was Seth Williams, but I mean, I don't need to say much about him. We'll see where he goes in the NFL draft. It seems like the NFL is not very high on him, so I'm like prepared for him to be a 7th round pick, and then I'm going to have to dump him down my rookie rankings. But I do like the size, and he flashes some ability on tape. The tape's super inconsistent, but you see some flashes of like a number 1 wide receiver. He tested well. Again, he's like 6'2", 215 pounds. So he's someone I'm curious to see where and when he goes in the draft.
I don't want this to go out on a positive note, so I'm going to go back to the overrated guys for one more and say Brevin Jordan, but more broadly the rest of the tight end class behind Pat Freiermuth, because right now in the DLF ADP, Brevin Jordan's right with Pat Freiermuth, and I don't think that that's appropriate. I think it's Kyle Pitts, then Gap, then Pat Freiermuth, and then if you want a tight end, look to the guys that are easier to trade for on the market. Brevin Jordan's fine. The speed's interesting, but I didn't see anything that's really worth betting on. And we know that tight ends in general take a while to emerge. So I think that if you want a tight end, try trading for a guy like David Njoku, OJ Howard, Harrison Bryant from last year, Chris Herndon before he has the chance to get the post-Adam Gase effect. I would much rather see what I can get some of those guys for than take any of the tight ends behind Pat Freiermuth. And certainly I'm not taking Brevin Jordan ahead of some of the wideouts that you would have to do so to get him early in round 3. I'm with you there. I mean, I do think if Jordan hits, it's going to be as a pass catching tight end, which is what we want in fantasy. But I can't imagine outside of FFPC leagues, with the tight end premium scoring, I can't imagine using a rookie pick on any tight end not named Pitts or Freiermuth in this class. Mm-hmm. Well, Byron Lambert of RosterWatch.com has been our guest today. Check out his work there. Follow him on Twitter at RosterWatch. Byron, please tell everybody where else they can find your stuff.
Yeah, of course. You can follow us over on the Roster Watch YouTube channel. Just search Roster Watch on YouTube. You guys can subscribe over there. And then obviously you can search any podcast platform for the Roster Watch podcast. And you guys can follow us through all of the travails of the offseason from now until draft season. We'll be launching the Dynasty Rookie Draft Cheat Sheet at rosterwatch.com basically as soon as the draft expires. And then I will be off to training camps for the month of August, as I've done the last 5 years. I'll usually go to about 10 training camps. So that's always really, really fun. You guys can keep up with me along the way on the training camp tour this August as we bring you exclusive intelligence right from those camps that are going to help you in your fantasy drafts.
Nice. Sounds like a fun month. Thanks for joining us before heading off on your vacation though.
Well, good talking shop, boys. It's a real pleasure. I look forward to doing it again. Okay.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for this final episode of the Draft Sharks podcast before the 2021 NFL Draft. Check out our full set of 45 Dynasty Prospect scouting reports. They are all free to read now on DraftSharks.com, as are the past scouting reports. They're linked at the bottom of that article as well. Fresh on DraftSharks.com this morning is our pre-draft rookie rankings, combining the individual ranks of Jared, Kevin, and me. That's also a free read, so go check that out. We will be on the pod waves, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, throughout the first round of the NFL draft. Follow along there. Follow along in the Shark Bite section on DraftSharks.com, both that day and throughout the draft. You can find us on Twitter, of course, at DraftSharks. Jared is at SmolaDS. I am at SchaufDS. It's SCHAUF. For our guest, Byron Lambert, Jared Smola, and the entire Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.